Alrighty guys, back for scenario number 2. A group of people at the residence who had plots at the community garden wanted to sell tomatoes. So they wondered if there was a method to grow tomatoes on their plants. So that was their question. They're like, does adding compost to soil make tomato plants grow more tomatoes? So this is their problem. Or this is their question, right? So the first thing they need to do is they need to do a little bit of research. The residents looked in the library and online to find out information how compost affects plant growth. All right, so you need to do a little bit of research, because then they are ready for their hypothesis. Remembering that a hypothesis is an educated guess. So you have to do a little bit of research so you can become a little educated on the topic, right? So based on their research, the residents made a prediction. So we are going to write an if, then, because hypothesis. So if I add compost, then there will be more tomatoes. Remembering that we are coming back right over here to our original thought, our original question. We're wanting something to grow more tomatoes. So we have compost and tomatoes, so we're putting that in our hypothesis. So if I add compost, then there will be more tomatoes because the soil will have more nutrients. Okay, and I learned with my research that I need nutrients in the soil for my plants to grow stronger because they need to get that nutrition. Okay, so my if, then, because, reminding ourselves that we need to have all of those parts. So if I add more compost, if I add compost, then there will be more tomatoes because that's your why. Because there'll be nutrients, okay? So then what they do next, they set up their experiment. All right, they set up their experiment. So the group used 10 plants in the experiment. Each plant had the 50 mils of water and 10 hours of sunlight throughout the experiment. The temperature was kept at 75 degrees Fahrenheit at all times. So we've got several controls here. Here is a control. Each plant got 50 mils of water. Each plant got 10 hours of sunlight. Each plant had 75 degrees Fahrenheit was their temperature. You need to have those as controls because the only thing we want to have different would be compost, okay? Everything else has to stay the same. So they set it up where 5 of those plants were planted in just plain soil, 100% soil. And then 5 of them were planted in a 50% soil, 50% compost, so a mixture, okay? All right, so then at the end of 10 weeks, they determined that 10 weeks was going to be their growing cycle. They counted the number of tomatoes on each plant, and that was recorded. Now we're going to go back up to our hypothesis, and see, does it make sense what they were recording? They wanted to know, will it grow more tomatoes? So of course that's going to be what they're counting will be number of tomatoes, okay? So then they are ready to do a little bit of analysis. Let's go ahead and change that up. All right, so the residents counted the number of tomatoes on each plant, produced and recorded it in the table below. All right, so since they have 5 plants, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that makes sense that they have 5 numbers for the 100% soil. You add them up, divide by how many you have, that gives you your average. So then we have our 50% soil, 50% compost. We have 5 of them as well, which makes sense. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Add those up, divide by 5. So for the 100% soil, I came up with around 19.4. And for the soil compost, I came up with about 27.8. So yeah, it did make a difference, didn't it? All right. So they were super excited about that. Compost rocks. All right. So this was a data table that they created. All right. Answer the following questions using scientific methods. Scenario number 2. What is the scientific problem the community residents are trying to solve? Does adding compost to soil make plants grow taller? Well, no, that doesn't make sense because we're not looking for them to grow taller. We're looking for them to grow more. Okay, so your answer is B. How does adding compost to soil make tomato plants grow more tomatoes? And this one, how can we grow more tomatoes? That is not a problem. That's not the problem that was stated. All right, what could be the best hypothesis the residents could make for this experiment? I think compost will help the tomatoes grow. Well, that's not a hypothesis. That's not an if, then, or because. That might be more of a prediction, right? Or like more of an opinion. If we add more water, then the plants will grow taller. All right, once again, we've got that taller. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for them to produce a higher number of tomatoes. So if we give the plants 50% compost, then they will produce more tomatoes. So there we go. What is the independent variable in this experiment? What is the one thing that we purposely changed between the control group and the experimental group? And it was the compost. What is the dependent variable in this experiment? What is the thing that we purposely measured? All right, what did we measure? And that was the number of tomatoes produced. At the end of that 10 weeks, they counted them up. So our independent variable, what did we change? What did we change? What did we measure? All right, what is kept constant in this experiment? We have 3 to choose from: the amount of water, the amount of compost, or number of tomatoes produced. Of that, the only thing that was kept constant was number of water. But we know we had others. We had sunlight. We had temperature. We had the type of plant. We had the same growing seasons. We did it for 10 weeks. All right. So we had a lot of constants because the only thing we were changing between these two groups was the compost. Okay. What is the average number of tomatoes produced in the 100% soil? That is 19.4. Whoops. So that's your B. Let's make that a little better. That's your B. Okay, what is the average number of tomatoes produced in 50% soil, 50% compost? That was our higher number, 27.8. Because remember, finding the average is adding up all your number set, dividing by the number that there were. So we added all those numbers and divided by 5. Okay, which would be the best conclusion for the residents to make? Adding compost to the soil sure does help the tomatoes grow. That's really not explaining what happened. That is what happened. We did see that adding the compost to the soil did help the tomatoes grow, but with the conclusion, you need to wrap up and you need to state your results. So let's look at the next one. Adding 50% compost to the soil causes tomato plants to grow more tomatoes. The plants with the compost produced an average of 27.8 tomatoes, while the ones with 100% soil only produced an average of 19.4 tomatoes. That's actually the correct answer. That was very detailed. So let's take a look at the third one. Adding compost to the soil had no effect on the amount of tomatoes that grew. since the plants with the compost produced an average of 27.8 and with soil 19.4. Well, they showed that there was an effect. So by saying that there was no effect, that is not the correct conclusion. And we're looking for the best conclusion. So our answer there would be B. So I hope this helped, and make sure that you are reaching out to me if there's anything that I can do for you. All right.